Hello, my beautiful people, and welcome to this episode 15 of Piece by Pieces. Today is such a treat. We have our first interview, and today we're diving into the topic of healthy masculinity. And we're going to cover questions like, what is healthy masculinity? What can it look like? And how can each one of us, each individual one of us, do our inner work to define what it means for us? We also explore this healthy masculinity as it appears in relationships. Whether you are a single woman moving to date and preparing for dating and a relationship, or you're in a relationship or out of a relationship, and how to work in partnership with healthy masculinity to achieve what we're all looking for in a relationship of healthy, stable, secure, trustworthy partnership of growing together and getting better together. We also touch on how we as mothers can impact our sons and our daughters to cultivate a solid, healthy foundation in what healthy masculinity is for them, even if they lack a healthy masculine figure in their life. Now let me introduce Matthew real quick. I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. His name is Matthew Robertson. He is a certified life coach, writer, and podcast host, based in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. When he began his work as a life coach back in 2019, he chose the name A Path to Call Your Own for his business, because that is precisely what he is passionate about. He's passionate about helping people find a path to their own healing, a path of discovering your true self-worth, a path to becoming your most authentic self. In his work with his clients, Matthew focuses on several key practices in inner work to walk that path of healing and authentic self-love, inner child healing and reparenting, to address your core wounds, breaking patterns of self-abandonment, codependency, and people-pleasing, learning to set strong, healthy boundaries, and becoming an advocate for your own needs and a warrior for your own self-worth. Choosing healthy self-love and loving relationships that honor your true self. Living a life of purpose, joy, and authenticity. Now, those are many pieces to peace. Matthew's work incorporates different tools such as journaling, poetry, movement, creativity, meditation, and insights from Jungian psychology, including archetypes. Matthew received his life coaching certificate from the Life Purpose Institute in 2019, and he will be soon starting graduate school to become a licensed mental health counselor. You can learn more about his one-to-one coaching opportunities at apathtoCallYourOwn.com. And his podcast is named, you guessed it, A Path to Call Your Own. And you can find him on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook under A Path to Call Your Own. Now let's hop in and get this conversation going. All right. So here today, we have the pleasure of hosting Matthew Robertson, who is a certified life coach. And today we're going to have a conversation around the topic of healthy masculinity and the healing path and journey of Matthew. We're going to hear about his story, and we're also going to hear about just, what this path looks like for a man. And, half of the population. I work a lot with women and have been immersed in the female healing journeys. And I honestly have little experience with the male version of this and the healthy masculinity. However, most of the women that I have worked with either have men in their life or desire men in their life. So it's an important topic that we're going to dive into, and I'm really excited. So Matthew, welcome to Piece by Pieces.
It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I mean, I don't take it lightly to be, asked to speak on some level on behalf of men, or
right.
To bring a healthy masculine perspective to things. Please believe me, I take that as a giant compliment, and I don't take that lightly. So I hope I will live up to expectations today.
Sure, I'm sure you will. And whatever it is exactly perfectly as it is.
Thank you.
So let's start off with a little bit of your story and your journey, because most of us, uh, health and wellness professionals, whatever flavor of that is, we've gotten into this because of our own healing journey. Our own healing journey
Mm.
brought us to this profession. So, would you share a little bit about yours and what the experience has been like for you?
Absolutely. And I second that my own personal history and personal healing path is also why I'm here today, and I'm excited to share some of that. So yeah, just a quick, introduction. Yes. So I'm Matthew Robertson. I live in the Asheville, North Carolina area. I'm a certified life coach. My coaching practice is called A Path to Call Your Own. And fun fact, just to share with you, Ashley, since I count you as a good friend now, just within the last few days, I've been solidifying my plans to start grad school in the fall to become a licensed mental health counselor. So hopefully
Oh,
within 3 years' time, I will officially be practicing as a licensed therapist, which feels amazing and great. So good things on the horizon as well. And yeah, I've been doing this life coaching work now for coming up on about 4 years. And my previous, professional experience, I worked in education. I was a classroom teacher. I taught English and creative writing, the middle school level and high school level. So worked with youth for many years. And I've always been drawn to what are sometimes referred to as the helping professions, education, mental health, coaching. And, what's interesting, just one thing to share about that, in most of the professional settings I have found myself in, I have frequently been the only man.
hmm. Yeah.
um, in schools, particularly in the English departments. The math and sciences were sometimes a little different, but usually I was the only male English teacher. I remember when I was teaching middle school, many students told me, this was like seventh grade, that I was the first male teacher they had ever had.
Wow.
So that's rather interesting to think about, right? But yeah, I've been doing this work, yeah, as a coach for 4 years now. And although I do not specifically refer to myself as a men's coach, per se, I work with all kinds of people. I always like to remember, actually, my very first paying client was non-binary. So I've never made my clients' gender the most important thing about them, but I do feel a passion for working with men directly. And I also love working with people around their relationships to men, maybe including past wounding, from experiences with men, whether that be fathers, whether that be, recovering from past relationships. Um, and particularly in the last 2 years, in fact, I've definitely, for better or for worse, developed quite an education on abusive relationships, including domestic violence. So I'm very well aware of the harm done by unhealthy men. Unhealthy men have harmed me profoundly in my life. It's one of the major things I've had to heal from. So I'm very realistic about that. And I also come today as someone who chooses to be hopeful about men. I'm hopeful about the goodness that is in men. I'm hopeful about the goodness to be found in the masculine. And I think when good men and healthy men, um, are present in our world, in our communities, I think we are a force for good. But I'm also very realistic about when we are a force for harm. And that's very, very real. And I'm sure many of your listeners have a lot of direct firsthand experience with that, and I do too in many ways. So I guess that would be a good segue point just to talking a little bit more about personal, history stuff. I mean, I think if we're talking about our relationships to men and the masculine, for many of us, that starts with our fathers. And I happen to be a man who has had a overall pretty challenging, difficult relationship with my biological father. I know, Ashley, you've mentioned to me that a lot of your listeners are single mothers, and I very much consider myself to be like primarily the son of a single mother. My biological father was around for, many years, some years of my childhood. He wasn't always emotionally present. He was physically present for some of it. But my teenage years in particular was just my mom and I, until my stepdad came into my life. And I do feel lucky to have a really phenomenal stepfather. But I grew up the son of a pretty mentally unwell father, with a lot of emotional instability. Um, I've developed quite an education this past year around narcissism. And I do believe that my father, my biological father, is kind of that covert, vulnerable style of narcissism, if anybody's familiar with that. And it passed on to me, several, pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms. I've struggled with a lot of codependency in my life, in my relationships, kind of as a result of having this very kind of emotionally needy, very emotionally unstable father, that I sort of felt obligated to try to help, or if any of your listeners know that term of like parentification, where the child gets kind of pushed into being the parent's caregiver. That happened to me a lot in my life. I actually like took in my father in my late 20s when he was actually homeless and showed up at my door, and I took him in and felt like I was raising a teenager for a few months. Um, I did not get a great start in life on having healthy masculinity modeled to me. Um, not really from my biological father, and not really from the culture around me. I'm from the South originally, and a lot of the messages I got from the culture around me, from like the church culture around me about what it meant to be a real man, did not resonate with me, did not make sense to me. I'm much more of a artistic person at heart. I'm a creative person at heart. I'm a giver. I'm a nurturer in many ways. As much as I am here today to talk about masculinity, when I look inside myself, I find a huge feminine side. I love my feminine side. I acknowledge and honor the feminine in me big time. But what was missing for me for so many years was a sense of being, what does it mean to be a man that I'm proud of? Not the, I don't care what the world thinks necessarily a man should be. How do I show up in my own life and in my relationships as a man, in a way that I feel proud of, that to me feels like a good, noble, honorable man? And it's been a journey to figure that out. I am 37, and I think I'm like just starting to really put the puzzle pieces together. And I'm
Yeah,
sure it will continue. I'm sure it will continue.
right.
Ashley, I may just make one little fat last point here. Ashley, I was on your excuse me, you were on my podcast
Yeah,
last week. Sorry, I'm getting confused. Whose podcast is this? No, I'm kidding.
right.
I happen to be looking forward to future fatherhood in the coming years. I don't have children at present. And I know fatherhood is going to be, believe me, I know, a continuing evolution of an understanding of what it means to be a good man. Um, but I think I'm starting to figure out what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love
I'll leave it at that for
y-
now.
Yeah, no, I love that. Because, really whatever role it is that any of us are looking at, whether it's a man, a woman, father, a mother, a sister, a daughter, etc., professional life, whatever, it really does come down to what what we think, what the individual person feels and believes is how they want to show up in that specific role, and knowing inside themselves why, this is what it means to be a good man to me, and this is why, and it's in alignment with my personal values. And that, yeah, it doesn't matter what the world or my biological father or the guy at the grocery store thinks about how I'm presenting as a man. If this is what is in alignment with you, then that's really what's important. And then that's something that I lead my clients through, and it's usually in reference to being a woman, and owning their motherhood. What does a good mom, what does that mean to you? Because if you
Yes.
ask the world, you're going to get all kinds of answers. And they're going to contradict each other, and they're going to be black and white, and they're going to be right and wrong, and they're going to be, depending on where you look, you're going to get a different answer. So like it really is the work to figure out what those answers are for ourselves. So
Yes.
I love that path for you.
Yeah. And I just want to add on to that real quickly. I think that's why for many of us, gender has been oftentimes a hurtful experience and even a traumatizing experience, because many of us get presented with notions of being a man, being a woman, that's all around sort of rules of who you should be. And I have to say that did not serve me well. And I don't really know many people who that served well. And yeah, I at the core of my work, remember my coaching business is called A Path to Call Your Own. And I mean that. That's what I want to help people find. And so that authenticity piece is so, so important. And it's unfortunate that a lot of our conversations around um, manhood, womanhood, masculine, feminine, it's easy to mishear those as conversations about like who we ought to be. And that's not my perspective at all. And, my life is full of, like, for instance, great LGBTQ plus friends who experience gender in all different sorts of ways. Um, and I love them and want to support them. So I just want everyone to be healthy and authentic. And to the extent that the masculine and the feminine can be a part of that healthy experience, then I'm all for it. And that's all that matters to me.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Because each one of us also, regardless of our biological gender, we have, quote, masculine and feminine traits and sides of us and different energies and stuff like that. You mentioned that you were a teacher before, and that you were one of the only men in that profession, or not one of the only, but mostly women in that profession. In my past profession, I was a civil engineer, so the opposite. It's where, most of my education, my university time, and then being in the working environment as an engineer and all that was, I was one of the few women that did that type of work. So, um, and I still have those, that, like, I can tell the difference in myself when I'm in my masculine energy, and when I'm in my feminine, and seeking a balance and a harmony with that. um so good, wonderful. So let's a couple of days ago, I posted a question onto my Facebook page about healthy masculinity, and asking my followers for questions. And we're going to dive into those, if that's all right.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So we'll start with a couple of the questions that I had thrown out first. And so let's look like what does healthy masculinity look like? What can it look like? Because we just covered that there's not a checklist. There's no, you have to do all of these things and you can't do any of these things, like that doesn't really exist. But what can it look like? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to start with this. Last year in February, I also conducted a really interesting Facebook poll of sorts where I posted a question that I intentionally directed actually to women. I wanted feedback from women on the following question. What qualities do you really value in a truly good man? I wanted to get that from a woman's perspective. And the feedback was really interesting. I got over 100 comments. And most of the comments were oriented around how men show up in partnerships, like romantic partnerships. But it also included ways how men show up as fathers, brothers, sons, coworkers, just like in the men in your life, when you see them showing up in a way you appreciate, what does that look like? And I crunched the numbers afterwards, and I brought together the top 5 answers. I think it's just a really good place to start. The undisputed number one quality that women said they really appreciate in a good man was honesty. And we'll circle back to that in a moment, because I think there's some good reasons why that's so valued. But the other 4, there were some groupings of words, but it was number 2 was kindness, compassion, and empathy. Number 3 was great communication skills. Number 4 was self-aware, self-reflective, self-loving. So a man who has a capacity to reflect on himself, work on himself towards being a better version of himself. And the number 5 was showing emotional intelligence and emotional availability. And I thought that was a really phenomenal list. And, some people in the thread did ask the question, and I think it's a fair question. Well, aren't those just qualities of a good person? What does this have to do with men per se?
Very true.
But I think my response to that is that, so let's take, for instance, that honesty came in at number 1. To me, that tells a certain story, right? One of the stories that I think that tells is that what I would assume from that is a lot of women have had experiences of men in particular, particularly men, not being honest in their relationships. Right. And I thought that was a really wonderful, well, it's not a wonderful thing, but it's a powerful insight that perhaps one of the most profound things men need to look at in our current world is our relationship to telling the truth. And if there are moments in our relationships where we are not telling the truth, that's an area for us to take a very hard look at. When a man isn't completely honest, what's going on there? And so I actually brought this list and this conversation to a men's group I was hosting at the time, and we had a really good, hearty conversation about, how do we better embody these qualities? But I am a really big believer in my own life. And again, this is just my human journey, but it does feel a part of my journey as a man, is a commitment to really radical honesty. I do not believe in keeping secrets. I am really committed in my relationships to telling the full truth, and not, even watching out for those temptations to tell the truth, but then leave a little something out,
Right.
Maybe not to maybe not paint the whole picture.
Right.
I really have paid attention in my relationships to, is there some part of the truth that I don't want to reveal, and why? So one way I really tried to address that in my last relationship, I've been single for about a year now, but in my most recent serious romantic relationship, I intentionally at the very beginning, with all of this in mind, I made a very serious pledge at the beginning of that relationship because I got a piece of feedback from her that I think women often give to men sometimes. She said, sometimes I have a little trouble reading you. I have a little trouble knowing maybe what you're thinking or feeling. Because men, we sometimes do have a habit of being a little stoic at times, and I think there is a plus side to that. I do believe, just as a quick tangent, that I think there is something good to a man being very steady and stable and grounded. That's a good quality. The shadow of that is like being emotionally shut down. We don't want that.
Right.
But I think there
Right.
is something good about a man being very like steady, kind of like a rock in a good way.
Right.
Um, but I got some feedback from my partner that sometimes I was a little hard to read. And I was almost surprised by that because I consider myself to be someone who's very in touch with his emotions. And if you ask me what I'm feeling, I can tell you. Um, so I told her, and I really made this a very sincere moment. I said, I promise you, if you ever want to know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what's going on inside of me, what my needs are, I would love for you to ask. I invite you to ask me, and you will get a full, truthful response every single time. If I'm not quite ready, if I don't quite know, if I haven't sat with it enough, I will communicate that to you. I will tell you, I'm not sure exactly what I'm feeling. I'm feeling something. I can't put my finger on it quite yet. Let me sit with it for a few hours and I will get back to you and you will get the complete truth. And I found that to be just an amazing experience. I felt like my commitment to that just upgraded my relationship skills big time. It was scary at times because sometimes
Yeah.
I was saying things that I knew, oh boy, if this maybe gets heard the wrong way, this could start an argument. This could be a source of conflict, but I lovingly said it anyway. And we sat together, maybe in the discomfort of
Yeah.
speaking the complete truth. And although that relationship did not work out for the long haul, I felt very proud of my commitment to complete honesty. I have some regrets from that relationship, but that's not one of them. I do not regret that I absolutely showed up in truth all the time. I have a
Yeah.
few other thoughts on this topic, but I feel like maybe let you jump in for a second. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, we humans, we are imperfect beings. And there is no perfect, right? There's no like one mold to fit ourselves inside of, and then that's, all the boxes are checked and we never say or do anything wrong or anything like that. So it is, and so inherently having a vulnerable, connected relationship to anybody is going to occasionally require these like critical conversations that are communication, that are open, that are vulnerable, where you can and do say the things that are not polished and perfect and that you know will be received and understood well. Like there's to just like let it out and trust yourself and your partner that you can work through those things and continue to have a conversation. And of course there's so many things that go along with that of like having this environment of emotional safety with each other. There's from healing through our own lived experiences or experiences with that specific person. Um, there's, just there's so many things that go into the ability to have those conversations that and much of that not like one side of it can't control what the other person is going to do and say and think and feel and understand about the words coming out of your mouth. They could take it the completely wrong way, and that happens.
Yep.
But not having those conversations, not sharing the things, hiding the things, not wanting to talk about the things, not wanting to sit in the discomfort, all of that leads to disconnection. Being
Yes.
disconnected from your partner, feeling like you don't know this person that you're sharing a house with, feeling like you're going to bed tonight, sleeping next to a stranger, feeling lonely when in your own house with your own family. Like I've experienced all of those things as well. And, like the way through that is the reconnecting or maintaining the connection from the get-go. So
Yes. Yes. Well, and I want to follow up on that. I will tell you one very important place where I learned that, and this is, I think, good to bring up at this time. I learned a lot of these skills of like brave speech from being a part of a men's group. And I cannot recommend more highly to men and to, if you are in relationship with men, to encourage them to seek healthy, conscious spaces with other men, intentional spaces. My journey with all of that started with, there's an organization called the Mankind Project that hosts men's circles all over the country. And I got started with that. And now I'm a part of a more local group, a little more informal, with just a group of good men that I happen to know here in the Asheville area. And we actually had a practice. This is a part of the Mankind Project sort of process, I guess you could say, is we really encourage each other to speak directly. If you've ever been in a situation where, you ask someone, how they're feeling, we'd be in these circles and, a man might start to say how he's feeling about something. But then he starts going off all these tangents and it kind of turns into the story and you're kind of dodging what you really want to say. We had a sort of protocol where if you felt like that was going on, you could lovingly say to another man, our code word for this was, we called it warrior speak, as in, hey, warrior speak. And it was an invitation to lovingly get to the point.
right.
and to say what you really mean. Like, cut out the
Yeah.
fluff, cut out the excess, get to the
Right.
heart of the matter, man. And it was a very helpful tool, I got to tell you.
Warrior speak. I
Yes.
like that. I like that. I like that. Yeah. Stop this fluffy stuff that you're doing. Like tell me what it is that needs to come out. What are the words that need to come out of you right now? I like that. That kind of
Yeah.
pairs with a female dating coach that's a friend of mine. Her name's Holly Hartman. She is a big proponent of clear and kind communication. She's like, when it comes to dating, like people start to play all these games and interpret actions from others because we're fluffing around instead of being clear and
Yeah.
kind with our communication. And gosh,
Yeah.
how many misinterpretations and misunderstandings could be, just prevented, straight up prevented by clear and kind warrior
Oh,
speak.
yes. 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 So feel free to adopt that warrior speak. If you don't mind, I want to touch on maybe just one more important attribute of healthy masculinity that I think I really want to say, and then we can go in some other directions. I really want to touch on a quality of trustworthiness. I think when I think about the qualities of a good man, that really rises to the top for me. And I think there's a few particular reasons why that's so important. I think, it's interesting. If you almost take a biological view of all of this, if you step back and you look at just all of human history and even in the animal world, And you think about males and females coming together to create children, for instance. I think one of the deepest needs of the female side of the species is when you create a child with a male part of the species, your primary concern in relationship to that male is, are you going to stick around to do this together? Right.
Yeah.
I think it seems to me when I listen deeply to the women I know, and particularly the women I know who are seek relationships with men, who have been in relationships with men, who are mothers and have created children with men. I think one of the deepest longings for women is to be able to deeply and truly trust a man. Can I count on you? Are you going to stay with me, with this child for the long haul? And frankly, to use warrior speak, I don't think there's any greater betrayal on the part of a man than to create a child with a woman and then bail. Um, I think you have failed as a man if you do that. I and
Yeah.
I am the child of that, a very slow abandonment, but you know, I get very angry about that. um, and so I think in response to that deep need of trust, I think when I think of a good, noble, honorable man, I think he really longs to be trustworthy. Now, I think a man wants to trust his partner as well. Like the trust needs to go both ways. But I
Right.
think there's something unique to a man about being worthy of that trust, to feel your partner's putting their trust in your hands, and then you being able to say, I got this. I got you. I got this
Yeah.
family. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here. You can trust me. And, I think there's ways to do that. I've obviously centered this example around family and children and all of that. But I think that quality of commitment and following through on your word, these very old fashioned ideas, I know,
Yeah.
but I think they've been around with us for a very long time for a reason. And I think these ideas of like, you know, like a good man, you can kind of take him at his word. If he says he's going to do something, if he says he's going to be somewhere, well, he's going to be damned if he's not going to show up and do the thing he said he was going to do. I try to live my life in that way, where if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And if I've made you a promise, I'm going to have to get murdered on the way to stop me from doing the thing I've promised that I was going to do. And
Right.
I'm not saying I do that perfectly, but that's
Right.
what I'm aiming for. That's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. But two things that came to me while you were talking, and they're not directly related, but they are in a way. There's a couple that I met last year while we were traveling, and they, I don't know, in their dynamics, one night as I was getting to know them a bit more, the man, they were telling me how they met or like how they ended up together and stuff like that, and he made the point of like, she chose me. Like I was here, I was hers, but she could have walked away. But she came back and she chose me. And he was like, and and she's like, yeah, and he's like, she's the one that has all the ideas and wants to do all the things. And I receive that. And I'm like, let's go. Like
Mhm.
let's do it. Another thing was there's a meme about like, a woman being like, it's like if I bought a llama and brought home a llama one day, my husband would be like, well, where do you want to put the barn? Like instead of being like, what are you doing with this llama? Why did you what are you thinking? And like all of that stuff being like, okay, we have a llama now. Where do you want to put its house? Like and and just another version of that, which is from the movie Frozen 2, the second one. don't know if you've seen it, but like towards the end, Anna is running towards this dam to get the rock giants to destroy it. And Kristoff, her fiance, comes in and or they're not fiancés yet, but he swoops in and like grabs her, but instead of being like, "What are you doing? What's going on? What's happening right now?" He picks her up and says, "What do you need?" And she says,
Yeah.
"I need to get to the dam." And he says, "Let's go," or something along those lines, and gets her there safely. So I think, like, I don't know, and maybe that just stands out to me, but that's a big piece of it as well, of like, I don't even know what that is, like, not like releasing judgment, releasing like,
Mm.
I don't know, it's an accepting versus I'm going to berate you with questions until you can prove to me that I understand.
Right. Right. Well, I think in general, in all types of relationships, to first and foremost offer, our presence first before we start offering our ideas on solutions. It's sometimes, regardless of gender, sometimes we can show up in fixer mode
Yeah,
too soon, when really our partner just wants us to listen first and just
right.
be there first. And then maybe we can get to problem solving mode. And if you need me to do something, I'll go do it or whatever. But yeah, I think that is a good quality that I think do healthy men do have a capacity to offer, is just like that. I'm here. I'm present.
Yeah.
I'm listening. And I'm not going to jump in and try to fix it for you, unless you ask me to offer my fixing abilities.
Well, and it kind of goes back to your rock analogy of them be of a man being solid and stable and that rock, so that because most women, we do fluctuate. We have varying things that we're passionate about, and our cycles and our hormones and everything fluctuate, and it is kind of, and this is old fashioned too, but it is what it is, of having that, and that one's not gooder, better or worse or bad or good or right or wrong, that these are just like two sides of humans, and working together
Yes.
for a good life.
Yes. Yes. It's like the
Well, so
mountain and
let's,
the water. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. Um, okay, so a lot of my listeners are single moms or single women. And one question that a lot of women have are around dating and relationships. Because most of us are seeking to have a relationship, but not just any relationship. We want it to be healthy and loving and all of those things from both sides. So what are your thoughts on the type of inner work and things that women can do as they're preparing to date, and or as they're starting to do that and in the midst of dating, or just being open to bringing another person into their life, especially, and the kids piece is a part of it, but as
Mhm.
the for the women themselves.
Yes. I think that's a wonderful question. And I would, I think it's important to start with that inner work side of things. Because I think that's a phenomenal opportunity if you are single at the moment. I know how discouraging that can feel in the moment, but to see that though as an opportunity to really clarify for yourself, um, your own sort of inner relationship to kind of the inner masculine, we could call it, so that when you meet a man in the real world, you have a much clearer sense of what a healthy man feels like. It's just so you feel it in your bones differently than maybe you have in the past. So I love to talk about this. So one thing, an approach I've taken with some of my clients in the past, kind of it draws some parallels to something, Ashley, we talked about in when I interviewed you. And so I think your people will be very familiar with this. I want to draw some parallels to how we do inner child work. So a lot of your folks probably know that, when we're looking at like healing the wounds of our inner child, we look within ourselves, we find that wounded inner child, but we also work on finding within ourselves that safe, loving adult energy that our inner child needed, right? So
Yeah.
we are like meeting these inner energies. We are finding what parts are wounded, and we discover that we actually have within ourselves the medicine that that wound needs, right?
Right.
And so I like to take a fairly similar approach when there has been wounding, like wounding around men, or it could be wounding around women, or whatever it might be. So let's say, and I want to use myself really as an example to begin with here. So, like I said at the beginning, I have some wounding around men. I, for a lot of years, had some difficulty making male friends. I found I didn't always trust other men very much. So, on my own personal journey, when I could recognize, man, I got some wounding related to my biological father, to men, what I began to do was to look, I began to look inside myself, look inside my imagination, and ask myself, like, where are there some images of good, healthy men that just what comes to mind, like when I think of that? And I love doing this with people, and I think it's actually great. You mentioned something like Frozen 2 earlier.
Yeah.
I love asking people about fictional characters that
Hmm.
sort of live in their imagination. I have asked lots of people this question, and I think the answers are always interesting. If you had to think of like a fictional character that represents like a good, noble, honorable man, what comes up for you? And I've gotten some really interesting answers over the years. One of my favorites, and this personally resonates with me because I happen to have a long history of being very nerdy and loving a lot of like fantasy and sci-fi stuff. Um, from Lord of the Rings, the character of Aragorn, played by Viggo Mortensen in the films. I've even seen like YouTube videos and like articles written about how Aragorn, played by Viggo in Lord of the Rings, is this really healthy masculine figure. Like he's a warrior, he's a badass, but he uses his capacity as a warrior for good. He's a protector at heart.
Right.
Um, and he shows up with emotional intelligence, and if you know a little bit about that story, he's sort of this, long lost heir to the throne, but he doesn't seek power. He doesn't decide to become a leader because, oh, my ego says that I should be in charge of everything. He becomes a leader because he displays the quality of leadership, and people keep asking him to be a leader. Like, be a leader because we believe in you. And so he takes on the responsibility of leadership, not because he wants it for his own self, but because he cares about his people. He cares about protecting what is precious and beautiful and sacred. And I love examples for that. And I think this is a great way for your listeners to also think about, to the extent that maybe some of us have like father wounds, to also think about like good, loving father characters that we've experienced in books or movies or whatever. Again, on the kind of fantasy genre, I was a big fan of Game of Thrones when it was on, and I loved those books and everything. And there's a character early on of Eddard Stark. and he is the kind of good father archetype. And he is killed off fairly early. Sorry, spoilers. It was 10 years ago.
Spoiler alert.
You've had time to watch it. I'm sorry. But he dies fairly early on. He sacrifices himself really for his children. And you watch later on in the show, there's a really beautiful scene I love real late in the show where two of his daughters are talking. And one of them quotes one of his like go-to sayings, one of his like words of wisdom. And these two daughters just have a moment of remembering their father and calling upon his strength, even though he's gone. And just to take that as an example for a moment, the idea that each of us carries like the idea of a good father somewhere in us. And maybe some of us were lucky to actually had that good biological father. But even for those of us who didn't get that experience in real life, we can call upon our kind of inner good father or an inner good man. So just to bring it full circle, when we apply this to dating, I really want to speak to like maybe women who are listening who have just, maybe you've just had a string of really crap relationships with men and you're like, I can't even imagine what it feels like to be in a relationship with a good man. I think this kind of inner work could be really helpful. And just to think about, if you were to sit with your unmet needs, right? Needs of yours, desires of yours, even. They don't have to be needs. They can be wants and desires that have not been met with men. Sit with that for a moment and imagine as a kind of meditation, imagine an inner, good, loving, noble, trustworthy, masculine presence sitting with you and holding you in those needs, and just sit with that and explore just in yourself what that would feel like. Imagine that those masculine arms holding you and offering to yourself what you haven't received in the past, and just begin to notice what that feels like. Get used to that feeling of, oh, and it's like, I know it feels silly. It's just playing out in your imagination, but that's how you get used to the feeling of being
Absolutely.
met by masculine energy in a protective, safe, loving way.
Yeah.
That is enormously powerful.
Yeah. And I think that it can also, kind of what was coming to me while you were saying that is that um when we're looking back at some moments and we know what we wanted and we know what we needed and it wasn't what we got, it wasn't what was there, and doing that, imagining that we did get, like what was it that we wanted and needed in those moments, that picture can start to become clearer of what it is that we're looking for, because what I'm looking for in a man may not match up with what Susie is looking for in a man, so like again it's back to the individual aspect of it, but it'll also, it can kind of trigger up anything where there were times in your past where you thought you had that and then it turned out to be an end to a means or means to an end.
Yes. Yeah.
And not wholeheartedly true, or that's your perception, so like it can also be because that can highlight fears that we've developed through our life around actually having the thing that we want and desire, because then it's like, oh, we had that before and then we lost it and that was really painful, therefore it's better to just not have it at all ever again, like our mind does some really interesting things to keep us quote safe from pain. So those are also really good opportunities for us to lean into and be like, what's going on here, and unpacking that and pulling the wisdom out of the situation, the personal, unique wisdom out of that experience, while also releasing any connections that are that are detrimental, that are not beneficial to us moving forward in actually attracting and creating, co-creating the relationship that we do actually want.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the more you find that inner clarity, you're going to go into a first date so much more richly informed by what really is best for you, what love really feels truly, truly good,
Yes, I totally agree.
So I was going to add to that, yeah, and I think when we calibrate what we're truly looking for and what is truly healthy for us, when you go out on that first date, I think you stop being so amazed by maybe the more superficial things, or the more superficial things actually seem quite less important. And
Right.
and you actually start measuring the quality of a relationship by like the felt presence of how safe you feel and how seen you feel and how heard you feel. And sure, it's a cherry on top if he's also tall, dark, and handsome, or
Right.
has a beard and tattoos, or whatever you're into, ladies. But
Right.
that's all lovely. But the ultimate measure of a man is these deeper qualities. How safe do you feel in his presence? How trustworthy does this man feel? And I would just, I know we're going to get into this, question of like, obviously it's not just one date, it's also those early stages of getting to know a man. I would say just watching for that consistency, you know, watch in the early days of getting to know someone. Are their words consistently matching their actions?
Yeah.
Is is who they say they are and how they describe their lives really matching up with like the facts you're seeing on the ground? And if you're noticing discrepancies between those two, that obviously is something to, obviously watch out for.
Yeah. Yeah. And two things I wanted to add. If you are, invested in a relationship at some point and you do start to see that, that's a key conversation to have, right? Because you can present that in a, hey, I've noticed this. Can we talk about it? And how the man responds to that bid for connection and communication will answer a lot of your questions too. Because if they're like, oh, if they respond lovingly and openly and like, yes, let's talk about this, I want to dig in, or if they're like defensive and you're crazy, well then, all right, well then, thanks, bye, type of thing.
Thanks for playing, but no thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to note is you talked a lot about the sense of safety that you can feel with a man. And a lot of what I've seen and a lot of women in general and stuff and people that I've worked with, women that I've worked with, is that a lot of times we don't have um a foundational sense of safety within ourselves. And that by going down our own healing journey path, doing the inner work, whatever we want to call it, that we cultivate that for ourselves. We examine our fears around, different aspects of our life and release them and decide what it is that we want for ourselves. And then we work towards carrying and embodying a stable sense of safety in ourselves, of self-trust, of self-love, of, all of that type of stuff, so that when we do have another person there, or we're looking to bring another person in, that we can know and sense when something's off and when we don't feel safe. Because if we've never reached that level of stable safety within ourselves and by ourselves. And if that's something we've always gotten from someone else, then that throws the dynamic off as well. And we can end up making choices and decisions that that are not grounded or aligned.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is that's something I work with a lot of my clients on very frequently, is that setting healthy boundaries, knowing when to stand up for yourself. I love working with people around issues of, if you've had some past patterns around like people pleasing and self-abandonment, being too much of a giver, having really weak boundaries. I love talking with people about that. And one, I haven't used this word yet, but we've kind of already been touching on it. I love bringing in this concept of archetypes, and really many things we've already talked about. The inner child is an archetype, the inner mother, the inner father, those are archetypes. Um, um, and one that I love referencing a lot, I mentioned warrior speak earlier. There is this idea of the archetype of the warrior. It just speaks to, an archetype is really just a kind of an image or a symbol for something that lives inside all of us, like a kind of
Yeah,
aspect of the human spirit, if the word
right.
archetype is new for anybody. And I talk to my clients quite a bit about that archetype of the warrior, that each of us has a kind of warrior spirit. Now, obviously, when we're talking about men, we see in our world a lot of what we might call like the shadow side, the dark side of the warrior spirit. It's the part of us that starts literal wars and picks fights and is aggressive and ego driven. But we need a healthy side of the warrior spirit. And the way that I've really come to best articulate it for myself is a little phrase I like to use a lot, where to me, the warrior inside of us, its central task is to protect what is precious, to protect what is precious. And so that has historically been one of the domains of men, to be warriors and to be like the physical guardians of their community and to protect what is precious and what is sacred and what is vulnerable. Right.
Yeah,
But each of us has that inside of ourselves. And again, I mean, I think the more that you can be in touch with that and the healthy version of that for yourself, like if you have a capacity to set healthy boundaries, it'll then put you in alignment with people that also know how to both set their own healthy boundaries and then respect your healthy boundaries.
right.
And so I think it's a good thing to see kind of the warrior spirit in men, which can, by the way, include a capacity to get angry about things or to get kind of fired up when you see something unfair and unjust happening. But I think a good man uses his warrior spirit, even his anger, to guard what is precious to him, whether that's his
Yeah,
partner, his children. If you see, I think I love that expression among women. If you saw your child in danger, that like mama bear energy, it
yeah,
just like you would knock a truck out of the way to like keep your kids safe. And I think good men have that quality too. You know,
yeah,
when we see someone we love in harm's way, you better believe there's a kind of good anger and a kind of good, just like jump in and make sure everyone is safe. That's something that's used unwisely a lot in our world, but it can be used in such a beautiful, healthy way, right?
yeah. Well, I think a simple illustration of that is the sidewalk rule. Do you know the sidewalk rule?
I don't think I do. Tell me about the sidewalk
Okay.
rule.
It's it's a it's a rule that when a man and a woman are walking down the sidewalk, that the man
Oh,
stands
yes,
closest to the,
yes.
yeah, to the cars, and the woman is on the inside, so that if anything crazy happens over here from the road, that it's the man that gets hit. And if the sidewalk's not wide enough for them to walk side by side, that the man walks in front. And that
Hmm.
is like a protective barrier around what is precious.
Right. Yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're gonna roll into like how to healthily and effectively encourage. So we've talked a little bit about dating. So let's look at like what, we're in a relationship, whether it's dating, you're married, you're whatever. How a woman can healthily encourage their man to step up, to lean deeper into some things, to have those conversations of like, hey, have you thought about this? And things like that, to nudge them in ways, because we're in this partnership. And if it is a true and healthy partnership, we want the best for both of us, and we want to be better together. So, and that's kind of an assumption, but we're going to roll with that. That is the assumption. The underlying context of this relationship is that, you know, we want to be better and better together. So how can a woman approach this with their man?
Right. Yes. Well, I think, it of course begins with the context that, we can't, despite our best efforts, we can't just simply change our partners, and we can't, guilt trip them or shame them into being better. They're really, there's an art, of course, to growing together. But I think there are some ways I was thinking of, because I think I saw this, things along these lines show up in these questions, and I was really giving this one some thought. Like, what would be some ways if you were a woman in a relationship with a man, and you just, you could see that like your partner maybe has this potential he's not fully tapping into, or you could see some areas of growth for him, or even if you just wanted to see him step up more around the house or with the kids, like what are some ways to approach that, um and I think maybe it's helpful to identify maybe some unhealthy ways of approaching that first, and then we can get into the more healthy ones. I want
Okay.
to I want to bring up something that I think comes up for women sometimes. And let's kind of talk about maybe a woman's experience, and then we'll flip it around to a man. Um, Ashley, you and probably your listeners have probably heard this term of like good girl conditioning.
Yeah.
Have you kind of heard that concept, right? And it would
Yeah.
be like the ways in which a little girl would be raised in childhood to be a people pleaser in a lot of ways, right? To
Right.
to put everyone's needs first, kind of always be sweet, always be kind,
Right.
um,
Little
do
Susie is
what
such a pleasure to have in class.
right, right,
Right.
right. To do what mommy wants just because sort of you're desperate for mommy to see you. And it's this culture around, yeah, being a good little girl, keeping everyone else happy with your perfect behavior, right? Um, well, and we can realize that, if you are an adult woman and if someone's trying to get you to do something in a way that's like kind of pulling on that energy, that doesn't feel good, right? Like, let's say maybe you are a woman and maybe you're at like a family gathering, and an older woman in the family, maybe it's your mother, maybe it's your in-law, maybe it's a grandmother, comes up to you and something maybe needs to get done for at the gathering or whatever, and they say to you, what would be really nice is if you could do this thing. And I know you've always loved me so much and you wouldn't want to disappoint me. So why don't you be like a good girl and do that? If they spoke to you as a 30-year-old woman or a 40-year-old woman, you would feel pretty icky, right? That's a pretty
Yeah.
icky move, because they're subtly, they could just ask you as an adult, like, hey, do you have a moment we need to take care of something. Would you mind maybe helping with that?
Right.
Instead
Right.
of approaching you like an adult, they're kind of pushing some buttons of this almost kind of like immature part of this very young part of you, and they're manipulating that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Men do have a version of that ourselves. You could call it good little boy programming or whatever, right? And I think one of the things that breaks down communication in some relationships between men and women is, okay, let's say you want your man to do something. Let's say around the house, you've been, think of all the stereotypical things, taking out the trash and helping around cleaning or helping with the kids. I think sometimes it's tempting. It's tempting for all of us sometimes, but it might be tempting for you as that man's partner to kind of approach it in that way. And it kind of gets into this. I'm going to use a word that I know is a little loaded, and I know it's a place that I don't think women really enjoy going to. But there's that stereotype of kind of like the nagging wife, right? Where you go into complaining mode. You're complaining to him, why aren't you doing these things? I'm so sick of this. I'm so kind of frustrated. And there's no shame in like going to that place, because it's not fun to be there yourself, right?
Right.
But I want to propose that when you go into that energy of like, I'm complaining to my man about his behavior because I'm frustrated. Again, it might be warranted. We're understanding, we're compassionate here. But a lot of times what that I think is doing, what that's felt on the man side of things, is it's almost like trying to activate his little good boy conditioning of like, oh, I need to make the wife happy, or I need to just sort of please to get her off my back the way my mom sometimes used. And that's where men and women can sometimes frequently fall into the woman feeling like the mother of the man, right?
Yeah.
I'm horrified every time you hear this as a joke sometimes. Let's say like a woman has two sons and a husband, and she might joke about like, oh yeah, I have three boys.
Right.
Right. And we all know where that comes from. And that's a sad situation in my book. But the way to, I think, undo that is to one, recognize that even when that strategy works, here's where I think I can bring this home for the women who are listening. Even if that strategy works, even if you can kind of activate your man's like people pleasing tendencies of just like, okay, I'll do the thing just so you'll stop being mad at me or whatever. Even if that gets him to do the thing, and let's say he goes outside and he takes out the trash or he rakes the yard or whatever, when he walks back inside, it's a little boy walking inside. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're not getting a mature grown man out of that situation.
Right. He's coming back
And
looking for a pat on the back or a
right,
sucker or something.
right. And notice how that's not the energy you want with your lover, for instance.
Right.
That's not the energy you want that you're looking for in your man. I mean, just to use blunt warrior speak, that's not a turn on, for instance, of feeling like your man is just this boy you're having to mother, right?
Nope. Not at all.
So what could the alternative be? And let's assume right off the bat that some men are not going to be up for this. You could implement this strategy, and the man you are trying to be in a relationship with just isn't interested. And that will tell you, that will be good data for you. But let me just suggest that just like you don't want to be maybe approached in that sort of be a good little girl and do this thing for me, approach your man as to the best of your ability as a man, and have a conversation to the best of your ability as two equal adults and say, look, I'm noticing a lot of things that need to get done around the house this weekend. Here's a list of things I'm seeing need to get tackled. As the man of this house, what would you like to take care of? And create a moment for him to choose, and create a moment for him to step up as the man. And again, it's no guarantee that he will. I'm not saying this will be a magic trick that works automatically, but that's a different level of energy where you are think of it this way. What part of your man are you speaking to? Are you speaking to the little boy in him that you're trying to just get him to comply like you do with your kids sometimes? Or are you speaking to the grown man in your man? And are you trying to call that forth, invoke that out of him? Put the opportunity in front of him to step up. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. And that's on him. But just watch. Maybe it'll be an opportunity where he's like, yeah, I would love I would love to do this thing and this thing and this thing. I don't really want to like do X, Y, or Z, but yeah, I would love to do that around the house. And yeah, I'll take care of that, sweetie.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then he's proud of what he gets done, and you're proud of him. And to be blunt one more time, I guarantee you will have better sex that night
Yeah.
compared to a day of trying to complain and boss him around and him being resentful. And yeah.
Right. Well, and I think that another good benefit that comes out of that exercise too is like an acknowledgement of like, hey, these things need to be done. And we're in this together. We both live here.
Yes.
So what do you want to do? And then like, okay, so then he gets to pick. And then so the things that are left, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to do these either, but they do need to be done. So how are we going to resolve that? Because there's, maybe it's cleaning. Maybe it's like, okay, well, can we hire someone to come and clean the house for us, since it's something that neither of us are interested in doing? Is that a possibility? Oh, no one wants to mow the grass. Let's get, let's pay. There's people that do that. They come and mow the grass for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can we then, find another way to get these tasks complete, for both of our benefits, in a way that fits both of our needs and wants and what we're willing to do as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Your man may be way more of a problem solver than maybe you're giving him credit for at first. I'm just saying it could be.
It could be.
And maybe this thing that you are both resisting doing around the house, maybe just one of you needs that idea to be like, you know what? Maybe that's the thing where we just decide to invest in getting a professional to do that for us.
Yeah.
And
Or maybe it's like hey, you know what? Like the kids are old enough to help us with these things too. Like
yeah.
let's bring them into it as well, because they live here too. And
Yes.
there's lots of solutions. There's always more options than we know that we have. So but opening up those doors to effective communication and problem solving, instead of you never do this, you never do that. I've been asking you to do this for 6 months and you still haven't done it.
Right. Right. Yes.
And of course, yes, there is the man's response to that, and how we've gotten 6 months with you asking to do this thing and he still hasn't done it. Like there of course there is the other side to that as well. But
absolutely,
the focus here was, what can we as women do to nudge these things along in a more constructive way,
right,
that will actually achieve the thing we're wanting instead of
right. And let me say extremely briefly, I think that could also be applied to encouraging your man to do more forms of like inner work. Like if encouraging your man to go to therapy, join a men's circle. Again, you could approach that in a kind of complaint-oriented way. Or again, what part of your man are you speaking to? Could you speak to the man he could be and say, I'm inviting you to step up as a man, and I would be so proud of you if you went to therapy. Like that would be, what a courageous thing for a man to do, to go like join a men's circle and work on himself with other men. I'd be proud of you if I saw you do that. Who knows how the response might be compared to reminding him over and over again how disappointed you are in him.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's a good
And
point.
then
It,
watch how he responds and
yeah.
adjust accordingly.
Right. Right. Exactly. And that's such a key part in all of this is that there's very little that has the 100% certainty of it resulting in the outcome that you are desiring. Um, but yeah, it's the prototype process. Like you have you're acknowledging something, you have an idea, you try it, you see how it went, you adjust accordingly, you try again, like I mean, it's it's a process. It's not a one and done type of thing.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Well, I like all that, Matthew. And we're gonna do one more question and then we will wrap up. Um, Now, a lot of the women in my sphere are single moms, and of course, many of them are raising boys, are raising boy children, and maybe even if they're not single moms, but maybe they're in a not so healthy relationship too.
Yeah.
And they're raising boys in that not so healthy relationship, or they are divorced, but the co-parenting situation is still not so healthy. What are things that moms in those positions that really just they want to raise their boys in a way that they will be a healthy, stable, loving warrior of a man
Yeah.
when as they grow up.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question. And as I said in regards to my story early on, that question is very near and dear to my heart in a lot of ways because, I have a really great relationship with my mother. And I kind of actually meant to mention this a little earlier, but this is maybe a wonderful encouragement for the single mothers out there who are maybe worried or concerned maybe about how they're raising their sons. I actually did a really big decision over the last 6 months that in a way was in honor of my mother and her legacy of raising me. So I've introduced myself obviously today as Matthew Robertson, but that was not the name I was born with. My biological father's name is William Foley, and I was born Matthew William Foley. Interestingly enough, apparently he actually wanted me to be Junior. I was originally going to be William Foley Jr., but my mom put her foot down and said, I think we should let him have his own identity. And so that's where Matthew came from. But for 36, 37 years of my life, I was Matthew Foley. And as I explained, I've had a very difficult relationship with my biological father for most of my life. And it really hit kind of rock bottom about year, 2 years ago. And I realized that, as I moved forward in life, and particularly as I thought about wanting to have children and what kind of family legacy, what kind of father legacy I wanted to pass on, it became very clear to me that I did not want to pass on this legacy of the kind of fathering I experienced. And so last November, I decided to release the name Foley, and I'm actually still in the legal process of changing my name to my mother's maiden name of I am now Matthew Robertson. That's my mother's family name. And I thought it would be good to share that in this moment, just to reassure you, particularly if you're a single mother and maybe the father of your children, whether he's around or not around, and maybe he was not such a great guy and everything. I want to say this, that on a long enough timeline, children do see their parents clearly
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
And if you have truly been the healthy, loving parent, your kids are going to love you later on in life. And the parent that didn't show up and the parent that wasn't healthy, even if right now, whatever the dynamic might be, they'll see that clearly too. And
Yeah.
I hope that's some words of encouragement as the son of a single mother, that you eventually know who the good parent is and maybe who the not so good one is. So I'll just start there. Um, anyway, I have three suggestions here for the single mother maybe raising a son. The first thing is we spoke about this earlier, is to do that inner work piece around your own wounds with the masculine,
Yeah.
to particularly look to the father wound. And that could mean several things. That could maybe be look to your relationship you had with your father, look at the wound that may be there from your children's father. That's another kind of father wound, to
Yeah.
have felt betrayed, abandoned by the father. So
Hmm.
look at your relationship with, and again, I'm almost using it in this archetypal way, like the father, like what has been your relationship throughout your life with the energy of the father?
Right.
And that even, might take on a kind of a spiritual, religious significance,
Yeah.
obviously, right?
Yeah.
Look to that and see where there needs repair, and again, going back to that idea of like, if there has been a really harmful, shadowy, toxic inner relationship with father energy, repairing that within yourself is a beautiful play. That is a gift to your son.
Right.
That's a gift to your son. um a little more practically, um one thing I'm really a big believer in, and again, I am not currently a parent, but I have been an educator. I've worked with youth all my life, and I think a lot about parenting. And one thing I really believe in is giving our children permission and encouragement to feel the full spectrum of emotion. Everything from joy to tears to being
Gosh.
frustrated and angry.
Yeah.
I
It's so
think,
important.
yes. But I
If we
think with
start
our,
if we start telling them to shut down one emotion or another, or that these aren't available, and if you feel this, then you're bad. If when those things take root, it's not good for anybody.
yes, yes. So I think with the raising of boys, like, we're obviously doing, in some ways, a really beautiful thing in our culture of, for instance, encouraging our boys to know that it's okay to cry, for instance, and to feel sad. And to, we're giving our boys more access to emotions that we used to label, oh, that's not manly, and
Right.
you need to grow up and be a big boy. You can't cry, you can't feel that. I'm loving that we're giving our boys more access to that fuller range of emotion. I think what might be interesting as a single mother, particularly if you have some wounding from men and wounding around the masculine, one thing to maybe just very uniquely look out for is, let's say you see your son acting in a way that is more kind of like traditionally, stereotypically masculine. You see him being really competitive. You see him expressing some anger, and you see him expressing it kind of physically. Things along those lines. It may bring up something in you where you
Right.
go, ooh, that's toxic. That's bad masculinity. And I would just encourage you, just for the moment, just to pause and watch and see if that's just him moving through what he needs to move through.
Right.
And notice, maybe you can even ask yourself, if I saw my daughter being angry and needing just to physically let it out, would I judge her as much as I might judge my son? And I think there's some little subtle things to pay attention to there. Yes, we all know that collectively men have some issues with anger and aggression and violence and being too competitive. But a boy is allowed to be a little angry now and again. A
Yeah.
boy is allowed to like want to win a competition. And if you would cheer your little girl on for like really wanting to win, it's also okay to let your boy be a little competitive. So I would urge just with your boys, just to again give that same permission to feel the whole human experience. And if there's something that almost triggers a little thing in you of like, I'm a little worried about that, just let it play out and see if that's just him being a little human. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
final thought. Um, I would really, particularly if maybe the father of your child is not in the picture, or maybe if he's physically present, but you kind of know in your gut that he's not going to provide the true masculine kind of mentorship that your son really needs. I would keep your eyes out for in the years to come of opportunities for your son to be in the presence of good men in whatever form that comes, whether it's maybe in sports. Really pay attention to your kid having a good coach, like a good man who's got good energy, that's safe to be around. Look for an opportunity for your son to encounter good mentors in older men. And again, there's some discernment there, use your
Right.
mama
Of course.
instinct to see who feels safe and who you really trust your son around. But this has actually been there's a long history in a lot of indigenous cultures. I've done some reading and research around this, that it was kind of understood that a young man needed more than just his one single father.
Yeah.
The men in the community, particularly like it was traditional that if the mother had a brother, that uncle figure was seen as being really important to a young man's development. It's almost kind of where our idea of like a godparent comes from. Like I happen to have a godson. I'm a godfather of my best friend's 2-year-old little boy. And when my friend Jeremiah asked me to be the godfather, it was specifically with that idea that if Rowan, his little son, that as he got older, if he ever needed another man to talk to, and just for one reason or
Yeah.
another, his dad wasn't the best person to talk to, that I could always be there as a kind of uncle, figure,
Yeah.
or like older brother feel. Men need that, and I'm going to bring up one more science fiction fantasy thing. I love, but I think this proves a really good point. I grew up loving Star Wars, as many of us do, and I actually really loved the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's a great archetype, again, of that mentor figure. Like the young hero is on an adventure and he meets this kind of wise mentor, right? And it's such a classic theme in a lot of adventure stories like that. And all children, but I think particularly young boys, need those mentor figures. And I think one thing that's interesting about Star Wars, I won't get too geeky here, but just bear with me for like 60 seconds. If you think about that character of Luke Skywalker, young man, who in the course of his story is going to learn that his father is Darth Vader, right? You know what the name Darth Vader is supposed to kind of represent? It means the dark father.
Yeah.
Darth Vader, dark
Yeah.
father.
I could see
What
that.
happens to a son when he realizes that his father is lost in darkness, as
Yeah.
many young men do? I felt my voice is getting a little shaky talking about it because I feel this.
Yeah.
Well, what did Luke Skywalker find on his journey? He found Obi-Wan Kenobi, that good, solid, loving man who shows him his way in the world. And Obi-Wan Kenobi is not his biological father, but he plays that role as a mentor. And I encourage again because I know there are some single mothers out there who maybe the child of your excuse me the the father of your children may in fact be quite a dark figure who is not
Yeah.
trustworthy, who has done maybe, in fact, evil things. And that happens in our world. And I have seen that up close and personal. Even if your child's, excuse me, even if the father of your children feels like Darth Vader, find your son an Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
Find them a good mentor, and that will steer them right. At least it will help in a really big way. So that's my
Yeah.
geeky ending to to all that.
No, I like it. Well, and there's so much that's wrapped up in that, like when the father is a a man lost in darkness of whatever kind, because then there's so many feeling like there's the mom takes on a responsibility and a mom guilt of like I created a child with that person, and then there could be like unhealed wounds there in the mother, so then like she may talk badly about the father and she may complain about this and you're dead to and like that kind of stuff to the child, so then the child's hearing that too and the effects of that, and then at some point the child will be like, but he's my dad, like he's half of me, and have that. And then like if he's all bad and he's half of me, like then I'm bad. Or does that mean I'm bad? And like all of these other pieces that can be created in that dynamic as well. And while there are, this goes back to the mom doing inner work, just being the best version of herself that she can
Yep.
be. Um,
Yep.
and being that for your child, but yes, but also finding other models, other examples, expanding the database, if you will, for your child of men, of
Yeah.
men in general, so that there are um you know good role models in there as well.
Yes. 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 And just maybe a final comment on that, again, just offering, again, as the son of a single mother, one little piece of advice I would give is that, if your ex and, father of your children really has done some awful stuff, it's not your responsibility as the mother to, I would never recommend trying to create a false positive image of the father so that your kid can have like a positive father figure. And I know
Yeah.
that's super complicated. But I will just say that, you know, the sooner I really began to see my biological father clearly and began to understand that I don't have to be like him, I get to choose to be my own man. I get to
Yeah.
find the father within.
Yeah.
That was essential. And that's when my real healing began. So if you kind of know that your child's father is not going to be able to provide good father energy, I don't advise like a kind of fake it till you make it approach and just sort of like pretending like he's amazing. I don't recommend that, but you can still, your son can still learn what a good father is in these other ways. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to come from the biological father, and I wouldn't recommend pretending like it will or it can. Expose your son to other good masculine energy. But yeah, I wouldn't lie to your son about his father
Yeah.
just to preserve a good masculine image. I don't think it's worth it. That's just my
No.
personal opinion, and I'm not. That's a it's a very private matter on how people handle that. But don't tell your son lies is
Yeah. I,
my
I
piece of
agree with
advice.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
because it's
And
tempting to do that, sometimes.
yeah, and at the same time, on the other side of that, like you don't need to divulge all the details of anything either.
Mhm.
Um, I know with my own situation with my daughter's dad, you know, he's not a bad guy. everything that I fell in love with him, he still is. But there was these other things that we just didn't get along. We weren't compatible. We weren't happy together. And yeah, there were some things in there that were hurtful to me, but he wasn't intentionally trying to hurt me. They were just,
Yeah.
it was just a mismatch. And there were so many things like that. So now that my daughter's getting older, it's been a little while, but there was a period where she was asking a lot of questions. And I didn't villainize him. I didn't victimize myself. I didn't, I was just kind of like, look, I'm a good person and he's a good person. But we weren't good together. We weren't good together. We weren't nice to each other. We weren't kind with each other. We just didn't get along. We didn't agree on a lot of things. Like it was just, it wasn't a healthy, happy situation for either of us. So,
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I could go down a path of villainizing him. I could take the things that did happen and twist them, and like that option is available to me, and I'm choosing to not do that.
Right. Right. I think as with all things, age appropriate, kind honesty is the way to go. And
Yeah.
then like as I said earlier, kind of trusting that ultimately your child will come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
And the relationship your child has with his or her biological parents, by the time they're 40 or something and they're grown up and they will end up making their own choices, and you have to sort of trust that they will find their own way in how they choose to relate to their parents, and that's going to be ultimately their choice.
Yep. And
you
we can't
know
control that. We can't control
no,
the timing of
no,
that. It
no.
should have happened by now. Why haven't you figured this out?
Yeah,
We can't. It's their path.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Matthew, I think we'll wrap it up here, but it's been a
Yep.
pleasure talking to you. And I feel like we
Yes.
could go off on all kinds of different directions and different tangents and talk about all the different aspects of all these things. Because, um, you know, I mean, this podcast is called Piece by Pieces, examining the human experience, because there's so many different facets to it, and it's all connected, and you know, and all that kind of stuff. So thank you for being a guest today, and I just greatly appreciate it, and appreciate your story and your wisdom and your vulnerability with your own story, and all that. Where can listeners find you if they are wanting to know more about you or your services, or want to refer you to someone that they know or anything like that?
Absolutely. Well, one more time, my coaching business is called A Path to Call Your Own, and so that name is where you'll find a lot of my stuff. So my website is a path to call your own.com. That's also my Instagram handle, and that is the name of my podcast as well. And so if you are a listener of this podcast and a fan of Ashley's, I just interviewed her. That was my most recent episode. We were talking about inner child work. And I'm about, I think, Ashley, your episode was number 41. So I've been doing it for a little while. There's a good back catalog of interesting episodes. You can also find me on Facebook under Matthew Robertson. I've been doing some really interesting Facebook Lives recently called Ask a Life Coach, where I kind of choose a specific topic for the week. Like we've covered inner child work. We've had some evenings dedicated to breaking patterns of codependency. We've talked a little bit about narcissism. We've talked about kind of blanking on the other ones, but lots of really good topics. So you can find me as Matthew Robertson there on Facebook. I'm also been trying my hand at TikTok. I've been making some videos over on TikTok. So again, you can find me there at A Path to Call Your Own. And I am always open to working with one-on-one clients. That's really the meat and potatoes of my work. And yeah, and I do love working with men. And so I love when people send men my way who want to do inner work, want to heal, want to grow, want to evolve authentically. But I also love working with women, and perhaps I've often found that sometimes the women who are drawn to working with me do so because they're interested in getting maybe a more masculine perspective on things. They want kind of a man's point of view on some things. So I love talking with women about, yeah, healing some of those maybe past relationships, past relationship wounds associated with men, doing some of that inner work, and then, sending them out into the dating world more informed about what is truly healthy for them. I love doing that kinds of work. But I love talking about boundaries. I love talking about breaking patterns of people pleasing and self-abandonment, breaking those patterns of codependency. And believe me when I tell you, I've dealt with a lot of that in my own life. So yes, if you've appreciated some of the things I have to say today and you'd love to talk further, yes, setting up a one-on-one coaching session would be a great start if you're interested in working with me. So that's it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone that's listening to this podcast. And we just really appreciate you. And we'll be back next week with another interview with another male in the health and wellness industry. So stay tuned for that as well. All right. Well, you all have a good one. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.